Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a time when breakfast meant something very different and a lot more fermented. Welcome to ancient Greece, where your morning meal might smell faintly of goat, look like a lump of clay, and surprise you with a little local wine. Whether or not the sun is up yet, you wake slowly nestled under scratchy linen, your clay roof above still cool from the night. A rooster crows somewhere nearby. A bronze pot clinks against stone. Your neighbor is already heating goat's milk. You yawn, sit up, and remember you're hungry, but not too hungry. In Greece, they call this first little meal akritisma, and it's more of a light suggestion than a feast. You trudge out into the courtyard, the marble still cool on your feet, and tear off a hunk of barley bread that's been soaked in yesterday's wine. This is no fruity chardonnay, it's sour vinegary and vaguely smoky. The bread itself is dense, a little damp from dew, and flecked with leftover ash from the baking fire, but it's warm and it does the trick. You chew slowly. The goats bleat some mornings. If the family is doing well, there's teganatae, pancake like fried dough made from wheat flour, olive oil, and curdled milk topped with a drizzle of honey. Think of it as a crunchy crepe with attitude, but today it's just goat cheese and a handful of figs, and a surprisingly robust garlic clove which you eat whole because grandma says it keeps the demons and stomachaches away. A cat brushes against your ankle. The sun is creeping over the hills. You sip more wine, it's diluted with water because you're not an animal, and lean back against a fig tree. Historians still argue whether these light breakfasts were considered practical or symbolic. Some believe the Greeks saw overindulgence early in the day as a sign of poor self-control. Others say it just wasn't hot enough to need a real meal. Yet either way, you wouldn't last long without at least a few olives tucked into your tunic. Speaking of olives, you're going to get to know olives: black ones, green ones, bruised, pressed, pickled, and turned into paste. One Roman writer centuries later would mock the Greeks for using olive oil as both salad dressing and personal lubricant, but for now it's just breakfast fuel. You wander down to the market square, the agora, because you've heard there might be fresh honeycomb from a trader who came in from Euboea. Bees are big business, and everyone knows Euboean hives make the sweetest stuff. On your way, you pass a man chewing something from a wooden skewer. It smells like fish, but not in a reassuring way. This is your world now, a culture that celebrates moderation, yet will eat octopus before noon, where physicians preach balance, but morning wine is completely fine. You pass a temple, smoke rises somewhere inside. A priest murmurs over a tray of barley cakes. You briefly consider pretending to be a goat to get a noni of your neighbors offers you a sip of their breakfast soup made from pulses, maybe lentils, maybe something you don't want to ask about. It's brown, thin, and has the texture of yesterday's dishwater. You smile politely and fake a cobby. Now your stomach's adjusting. You feel the faint warmth of sun on your shoulders and your limbs get heavier. After you could nap again right here on the stoop, but a cart rattles by carrying sacks of millet and what looks like a pig's head in a basket. It's going to be one of those market days. In a shady corner of the agora, a man is selling spiced nuts. He claims they improve memory, enhance stamina, and prevent hair loss. You nod and buy 3. They taste like salted clay. A sleepy donkey snorts beside you, and a woman is loudly arguing over the price of goat butter. Somewhere nearby, a baker slams open a clay oven door and smoke billows up in a puff. You smell something sweet, maybe cinnamon, maybe burning fig leaves. Back at home, your aunt is roasting chickpeas in a pan over hot stones. She tells you the gods eat this exact breakfast every day atop Mount Olympus. You raise an eyebrow, and she throws one at your head. You catch it. She smilasayu. Hear someone mention kaikon, a drink made from barley, herbs, and sometimes grated cheese consumed by peasants and mystics alike. It's thick, a little gritty, and oddly refreshing. Some say it has psychedelic properties when prepared during sacred rites. Today, though, it's just earthy. The oddest part of all this, it works. Your stomach settles, your brain quiets, and you start to feel well nourished, not in a pancake stack and latte kind of way, but in a simpler, earthier, vine leaf wrapped kind of way. And despite what your modern self may think, these breakfast customs lingered. Even the word Symposium now associated with stuffy academic conferences. Originally referred to Greek drinking parties often beginning with yes light snacks. Remember that wine-soaked bread? It shows up again later, this time for dessert, but first we'll have to digest a few stranger things. You follow the smell before you know what it is, and by then it's too late. Something sharp, salty, and a bit horrifying is in the air. It's not sewage, it's not sweat, it's fish, or at least it used to be. You're nearing a row of clay jars near the back of the Agra. These jars are sweating in the sun, covered with cloth lids and sealed with wax. If you ask the merchant what's inside, he'll grin proudly and say gyros, or liquamen, the pride of the pantry and the smell of the street. Gyros is a fermented fish sauce made by layering small fish or fish guts with heaps of salt, then leaving the whole mixture in the sun for weeks or even months, until the fish dissolve into a briny grayish liquid. The solids are strained out or sometimes just stirred right in, depending on how rustic you like it. You lean closer and instantly regret it. A wave of salty decay hits your nose. Imagine anchovies left in a boot during summer at a note of low tide and the faint sweetness of rotting fruit, and you've got a sense of what ancient Greek cooks loved to drizzle over nearly everything. Historians still argue whether gyros and liquamen were identical or distinct. Some believe they differed by recipe or regional flair. Others say the terms were used interchangeably across centuries. Either way, the Greeks loved it, and the Romans would later love it even more. In some homes, gyros is stored in ornate amphorae, labeled with painted dolphins or olive branches. In others, it's just a blackened jug hidden behind the olive oil jar, and no one talks about it until it's already on the lentil stade. A woman is offering samples of her family's homemade blend on a cube of barley bread. You hesitate, but she's already waving it under your nose. The taste is shockingly not awful. It's salty, yes, and fishy, but it's also oddly tangy, almost like a thick vinegar with ambition. Your jaw tightens involuntarily, and she laughs, patting your shoulder. You hear an old man boasting that gyros is a miracle food. It preserves meat, adds depth to soups, and supposedly helps with joint pain and baldness. You nod along as if you haven't just mentally sworn to never taste it again. Of course, fish sauces aren't the only strong smells in the Agra. There's also pickled onions, stewed garlic, salted turnips, and occasionally a surprise in the form of sun-dried squid. These hang from strings like wind chimes and crackle when the breeze rolls through. You watch a boy dunking olives into a pot of something viscous. It's another type of sauce, maybe made with wine vinegar or mustard seeds. He stirs it with a feather, then licks the feather thoughtfully. Ancient food safety is not exactly airtight. Don't stall over a cook. Ladles out a reddish sauce onto a flatbread. The base is mashed fish guts, olive oil, and herbs. The result looks like salsa, but tastes like ocean floor. You try a bite and immediately need a sip of diluted wine to chase it. At a symposium later that evening, one of the hosts proudly announces that his cook has prepared a rare fish pate using eel liver, gyros, and crushed fig leaves for bitterness. The crowd murmurs appreciatively, and you see someone wiping a tear from their eye, whether from joy or the smell is unclear. The weirdest part is that gyros wasn't just a culinary ingredient. It had medical uses as well. Some healers believed it could draw out infections or soothe intestinal discomfort. Others mixed it into ointments for wounds because, if nothing else, it discouraged people from touching the bandage. And then there's the fringe theory. You hear whispers about religious rituals where gyros played a symbolic role, representing transformation, decay, and rebirth. It's not widely accepted, but the idea of a priest anointing a statue with fish sauce is too vivid to dismiss. Interiors. The evening deepens and oil lamps flicker round the tables. You notice a distinct layer of gyros sheen forming on the serving platters. It clings to the bronze like varnish. You wonder how many centuries of fish sauce have built up in these kitchens. A woman beside you shares that in her home village they still make their own using anchovies and thyme, and that her grandmother used to apply a gyros poultice to bruises. You raise an eyebrow, but your mouth is full of lentil stew that also tastes suspiciously of the stuff, and just when you think you've had enough of gyros, Someone brings out the sweeter version. A dessert wine is mixed with a tiny spoonful of fermented fish sauce to enhance the flavor. This seems like a prank, but it's not. The host insists. It makes the fruit taste brighter. You sip it cautiously and admit that he's not entirely wrong. Still, by now your nose is tired, your tongue confused, and your appetite somewhere between amused and defeated. The food in ancient Greece has teeth, and it's not afraid to bite back. You leave the gathering full, but unsure of what you've eaten. The air is cooler now, and the smell of gyros fades into the background, replaced by wood smoke and pine trees. But tomorrow, it'll be back waiting in the sun, thick and salty and proud. You wake early in Sparta and immediately regret it. The air smells like sweat, iron, and boiled meat. Someone somewhere is sharpening a blade, and a chorus of sandals slaps the earth in unison. You stretch sore from a night on a reed mat and wonder briefly if breakfast will be kinder today. It will not. This is the land of black broth, a famous or infamous Spartan dish that generations of writers, poets, and unlucky visitors have tried to describe and mostly failed. Imagine pork blood boiled with vinegar and salt, sometimes thickened with chunks of meat or stale bread. Other times, it's just the liquid, a dark oily soup that looks like ink and tastes like punishment. You sit cross-legged in the communal mess, a large stone-floored room, echoing with the sounds of clanking bowls and low grunts. No one talks much here. Eating is a duty, not a joy. Your bowl is ladled full, and you stare down at the surface. A thin skin forms from the cooling photon. Visitor from Athens once joked that Spartans only enjoyed black broth because they never got to try anything else. But Spartans were proud of their plain food. They believed comfort softened the soul and the body. What doesn't kill the appetite apparently makes it stronger. You lift the bowl, take a sip, and blink. Your eyes water slightly, but you manage not to cough. A young boy beside you eats it with practiced calm. Between sips he chews a slice of boiled goat tongue and dips it back in the broth as if it's perfectly normal. Historians still argue whether black broth was as common as legend claims. Some say it was served daily, others suggest it was reserved for mess halls and military life. Either way, the recipe varied depending on the cook, the season, and how many pigs had recently been slaughtered. And there were other delights too. You might be served boiled goat head, complete with eyeballs and brain if you're unlucky, or a mash of barley and onions topped with dried fish scales for texture, crunchy and not entirely welcome. With food is functional, hearty, and sometimes unsettling. Spartan children are trained from a young age to eat without complaint. A soldier who frowned at his dinner might earn extra drills. A child who asked for honey might be assigned to scrape soot from the barracks wall for an hour. Still, there are moments of surprise. A soldier slides you a chunk of smoked hare wrapped in fig leaves. It's salty, but aromatic, a rare treat shared quietly beneath the table. He winks, then goes back to gnawing on a bone. You pass a jar of something pickled across the room. No one knows exactly what's inside, and no one asks. That's the rule here. If it crunches, it's food. If it moves fast enough to catch its meat. Occasionally a traveling trader brings dried fruit or nuts from Corinth. These are hoarded like treasure, hidden in tunics or tucked under blankets. You once saw a grown man cry over a stolen date. The communal style of eating means there's no privacy and very little variety, but it does build bonds. Soldiers joke between bites about how they'd trade their entire armor set for a spoonful of Athenian cheese. A man with one tooth tells the same story about the time he mistook a boiled rat for a turnip and still finished the meal. Out of pity and pride is everywhere in this food. Every oily bowl, every scorched hunk of bread is a lesson, a reminder that Spartans live simply, fight fiercely, and do not need fancy flavors to be strong. Still, sometimes late at night you dream of honey cakes. You dream of olives plucked gently from sunlit trees, and cheese that doesn't come with a warning, but morning comes fast. And so does the stew. Potatoes aren't a thing yet, so you get barley again. This time it's mashed with water and wild greens served cold and stiff enough to slice. You eat it anyway because in Sparta, the food isn't supposed to comfort you, it's supposed to harden you. And you are already harder than yesterday. As the meal ends, the bowls are rinsed in Sand and smoke dried above a fire to burn off the grease. Someone tosses a bone to the dogs. And the mess hall clears slowly. The floor is swept with a bundle of reeds. The broth has left a faint smell in your tunic that will follow you all day, and you think to yourself, maybe, just maybe, tomorrow there will be goat cheese, maybe a fig, maybe even a crumb of honey, but probably not. You're back in the city now, Athens maybe, or Rhodes. The sun is higher and the market is alive. The air is thick with roasting oil and something spicy frying. Noises pop and crackle from every direction. This is where food moves fast, cheap, and sometimes a little dangerous. Welcome to the world of ancient Greek street food. You walk slowly past the stalls, letting the smells guide you. Earthy lentils bubbling in wide bronze pans, chickpeas sizzling in oil, and garlic, something sweet, baking in little clay molds. The smell is overwhelming in a good way, and maybe in a slightly suspicious way. To your first stop is a vendor selling flat cakes made of crushed pulses, ground with garlic, coriander, and wild onion. He shapes them into discs, presses them flat with his thumb, and drops them into a pot of boiling oil. The result is hot, crispy, and somewhere between a pancake and a savory cookie. You bite into one and burn your tongue instantly. Welcome to breakfast number 2. There's no real name for these in modern terms, but there's something like ancient falafel, and people line up for them with clay bowls and scraps of cloth to carry extra sacrist. A row. A woman is grilling little fish on skewers. Tiny salted sardines sizzle over coals, their skins blackening fast. She dips them in vinegar and serves them 2 at a time, wrapped in fig leaves. You chew around the bones, which are soft enough to eat and vaguely metallic in taste. Some stalls offer boiled snails served in shallow bowls with vinegar, oil, and mint. These are either a delicacy or a punishment depending on who you ask. One man slurps 10 in a row without blinking. He offers you one with a grin. You take it, chew slowly, and wonder why it tastes like pepper and rennet. The edge of the agora, a younger boy is hawking mystery meat skewers. He won't say what kind of animal. It is just that it's fresh and lightly salted. The chunks are irregular, the edges charred. You chew and think, maybe it's goat, maybe it's pigeon, maybe. You'll never know. Historians still argue whether street food in Greece was considered low class or simply practical. Some writings praise these stalls as symbols of bustling city life, while others mock them as places where only the desperate or gluttonous go to eat. But they were always there, noisy, smoky, and full of odd surprises. Own corner vendor is selling boiled grains mixed with honey and chopped nuts. He serves it in small leaf-wrapped parcels. It's sticky, chewy, and surprisingly good, like a dense granola bar. Before granola existed, a woman beside you buys 5 and disappears into the crowd humming. Someone else offers wine diluted with snow. Yes, snow. A man runs back and forth with bowls of shaved ice from a mountain delivery, mixing it into cups of spiced wine. The effect is strange, cold, and herbal, with a faint bitterness from the resin-coated amphora where it was stored. You pass a stall selling something more familiar, fried dough shaped into spirals, dunked in honey syrup and topped with crushed sesame. You smile and take 2. They're crisp on the outside, soft in the center, and coated in golden sugar haze. You immediately want 10 more. Nearby, a small group of workers sits on crates eating boiled turnips mashed with garlic paste. One has a slice of raw onion between 2 barley crackers. They offer you a bite, and it's stronger than expected. Your eyes water, your nose burns slightly, and you try not to sneeze on the turnip. Man, children dart between stalls carrying cones made of leaves filled with roasted almonds. They chew loudly, laugh too hard, and wipe sticky fingers on their tunics. One girl drops her snack, and a goat steals it in one bite. The vendor shrugs and throws her another. You find a shaded bench and sit to rest your legs. A man approaches balancing a tray of dried fruits, prunes, dates, and something that might be fermented melon. You try a bit and feel the immediate sweetness cut by a strange sour note like candy that's been buried underground for a week. It's easy to see why these markets thrive. No long prep, no cooking fire, just fast bites and sweaty hands and noisy mouths. The food is made for walking, talking, arguing. Even philosophers take part. One story claims that Diogenes ate from market stalls just to spite the rich who looked down on street snacks. He would loudly crunch turnips during public speeches to prove his point. A musician plays a lyre. Nearby a slow droning melody that matches the afternoon haze. You sip watered wine and close your eyes for a moment. You hear a dog barking somewhere, a vendor calling out his prices, and someone shouting about spoiled musselshin. You open your eyes again. You spot a new booth, a small table covered in thin strips of dried meat hung on twine. It's salted and seasoned with thyme and wild oregano. You take a piece, chew thoughtfully, and taste the hours of sun that cured itent. So the market drifts on, smoky, noisy, relentless, a place where taste is secondary to timing, where you eat with your hands and maybe your elbows, where every bite is a small gamble, but rarely a boring one. You brush crumbs from your lap, sip the last of your wine, and move on. Just a few stalls down, someone's frying cheese over an open flame. You arrive at a different kind of gathering now. The streets are quieter, the stone swept and clean. The walls are painted with delicate patterns, and a bronze incense burner puffs out something floral and faintly sour. This isn't a market, this is a symposium, a dinner party for the wealthy, the educated, and the occasionally ridiculous. A servant hands you a cloth to wipe your feet. Before you step onto the mosaic floor, you nod with exaggerated politeness and enter the room. Is dim oil lamps flicker on carved ledges, and low couches line the walls. You lie down on your side, elbow propped up, stomach already preparing for whatever is coming. The meal begins slow. The first course is simple: olives, cheese, possibly a few pickled vegetables. But don't be fooled, this is just the warm-up. Soon the real show starts. First up is sea urchin, cracked open and served raw with a drizzle of vinegar and a sprinkle of wild herbs. The texture is unsettling, creamy and gritty at the same time. It tastes like saltwater sadness and luxury. You swallow with effort, but the host beams with pride, so you nod and sip your whinny. A servant arrives carrying a pie, and you think finally something normal. But the filling is bird tongues chopped fine and seasoned with mint and cinnamon. The crust is buttery. At least you chew slowly, feeling tiny mussels you never thought about before, and try not to imagine how many birds were involved. Historians still argue whether these extreme delicacies were actually common or just reserved for absurdly elite feasts. Some evidence suggests that showing off exotic dishes was a kind of edible theater, proof of wealth, creativity, and questionable taste. Next comes a platter of roasted dormice, tiny and stuffed with honey and crushed nuts. Their little tails curl on the plate like ribbons. You glance at the man across from you. He pops one hole into his mouth, chews and smiles. You sigh and do the same. It's sweet, crunchy, and a little gamey, the kind of thing you'd probably regret mentioning to anyone back home. And there's wine again, always wine, but never straight. The Greeks dilute it with water and sometimes infuse it with herbs, or even seawater, depending on the mix. It can taste like a spiced hug, or like licking a bronze statue. You get both tonight. More courses arrive faster now. Pickled octopus, grilled eel, jellyfish in oil, a tray of snails roasted with honey and barley, a bowl of mashed beans mixed with fish, eggs, and something green that might be a leaf or a very brave insect. You reach for a pastry, hoping for relief, but it's filled with mashed lentils and anchovy paste. Still better than the snail. Host calls for silence and raises a silver cup. He toasts to the gods, the harvest, and someone's recent marriage. Then he gestures and musicians begin to play. The food keeps coming. One dish is just boiled roots shaped into tiny animals. Another is slices of liver arranged like flower petals around a mound of curdled milk. Cheese eat. One point a man starts reciting a poem about figs. The room goes quiet. Everyone listens respectfully, and someone cries into their barley whinny. A guest from Lydia presents a jar of imported delicacy, pickled locusts and pomegranate vinegar. The lid is sealed with wax and tied with dyed string. The host opens it with a flourish, and the smell escapes instantly, sharp, tangy, and deeply suspicious. You're handed one. You chew very slowly. It turns out the rich Greeks didn't just want to eat well. They wanted to impress, to shock, to entertain. Eating was not just about taste. It was philosophy, theater, even politics. You could say more with your menu. Then with a speech at the assembly, one fragment of ancient writing describes a feast where the guests were served nothing but dishes dyed blue. Some speculate this was symbolic of the sea. Others think it was just an elaborate prank. No one knows for Sribi. Now your stomach is doing gymnastics. Your mind drifts somewhere between full and floating. The lamps glow warmer, the music slows. The last course is served, a soft cake soaked in wine and sprinkled with something bitter, maybe crushed myrrh, maybe dried beetles. Who's to say? You recline deeper into the couch, listen to the soft clinking of cups and feel the weight of the evening settle on your bones. It wasn't a comfortable meal, but it was unforgettably. As servants clear the dishes and guests begin to drift into wine-heavy debate, you think back to the market stalls and the fried dough. With all the luxury in this room, you can't help missing the simplicity of that honey spiral. You ate with your fingers, but there's no going back now, not until dessert, and maybe not even then. You're walking now through the hills above a quiet village. The sea is visible in the distance, silver and flat. A low stone wall guides your steps, and the scent of wild thyme drifts through the air. Somewhere nearby someone is cooking snailsies. Snails, a game, but this time they aren't a street snack or a party trick. They're the main course, slow food in every sense of the word, gathered after rain, cleaned in baskets and boiled gently with garlic and herbs. The smell is earthy, sharp, and oddly welcoming. You crouch beside an old woman who's tending a clay pot over a low fire. She lifts the lid with a wooden hook and stirs the mixture with a stick. The snails roll lazily in a pool of oil, wine, and crushed fennel. She offers you one and waits as you bite in. It's soft, salty, and just slightly chewy. Better than expected, worse than a fig, but definitely food. Historians still argue whether snails were a delicacy or desperation meal. Some say they were for the poor, quick to gather and easy to cook. Others point to fancy recipes with saffron and imported spices, claiming snails were gourmet status symbols. The truth is probably both, depending on the time, the place, and the size of your coin purse. Crete snails are still a favorite even now. In ancient times they were collected in woven baskets, kept cool with damp cloth, and often fed on herbs for days to improve their flavor. Imagine snails eating better than you. That's ancient Greece for you. Back in the village, a young boy carries a tray of tiny snail skewers from house to house. Each one is drizzled with vinegar and pierced with a sharpened fig twig. He sells out by midday, mostly to men sitting in the shade, sipping wine and telling exaggerated stories about battles that never happen. In one courtyard you spot a flatbread smeared with crushed snails, mixed with olive oil and onion. It's meant to be shared, but no one touches it at first. Eventually an old man shrugs and breaks off a piece. Everyone follows. You find yourself liking the slow pace of it all. The way food is built around what's available, what's growing, what crawled into the garden by accident. No one here chases the rarest ingredient or dyes their dinner blue. They eat what the land gives, and sometimes that means snails. There's even a rumor that certain temple feasts included sacred snail offerings left for minor deities associated with rain and renewal. Not all gods demanded roasted lamb, some just wanted a nice bowl of mollusks. And clay tablet found near Corinth includes what looks like a recipe involving snails, leeks, and goat milk cheese, though scholars still debate whether the word for snail is correct or a mistranslation for something even stranger, like sea cucumbers or frogs, or possibly just a smudgy. A traveling merchant tells you that in Thessaly snails were once mashed into a paste and used to thicken sauces or spread on bread like butter. You grimace at the thought, but he assures you it's smooth, rich, and perfectly normal once you stop thinking about it. In one household, a woman proudly presents her personal recipe: a thick stew of barley, chickpeas, garlic, and snails, slow cooked for 6 hours. You sit cross-legged by the fire. As she ladles it into your bowl, it steams gently, smells of roasted herbs, and tastes like something ancient and very filling. You ask how long her family has been making this dish. She shrugs and says longer than the olive tree in the courtyard has been alive. That tree is older than the city. Later you spot a group of boys poking at a snail with a stick. They argue over whether it's big enough to eat. One says yes, The others disagree. Eventually they get distracted and wander off, leaving the snail to crawl away slowly victorious, and so the day drifts on. The sun dips lower, turning the stone walls gold. Bees hover over thyme bushes, chickens cluck lazily in the distance, and the faint scent of garlic and wine lingers everywhere. You find yourself thinking about taste, not the boldness or beauty of it, but the rhythm, the way of food. That seems strange at first, becomes comforting, familiar, even welcome if you eat enough snails. They stop being weird, they become dinner. You lie back against the stone, watch a hawk circle overhead, and let your thoughts soften like butter left out in the sun. Maybe you'll collect your own snails tomorrow, or maybe you'll just hope someone else already has. You wake to the sound of bees and the smell of burning ash. Someone is baking something sweet and possibly a little smoky. You follow your nose to a small kitchen tucked between olive trees and fig vines. Inside, a clay oven glows softly, and on a low table sit rows of round pastries dusted with something gray. You ask the woman stirring the batter what's on top, and she answers calmly, ash from clean wood. She says, adds bitter. You blink. She smiles, welcome to dessert in ancient Greece, where sugar is a myth and sweetness is a balancing act, where cakes are made with goat cheese soaked in vinegar, and nothing is ever quite what it seems. She hands you a still warm honey cake. Its outer layer is crisp, sticky, and smells of wild herbs. The inside is soft and tangy, made with fresh cheese, crumbled barley, and yes, a little vinegar. It melts slowly on your tongue, equal parts dessert and lesson. Historians still argue whether these ancient cakes were meant for everyday people or reserved for temples. Some were offered to gods, others to guests. Some recipes call for ash, others for sesame, and a few for crushed flowers. It's a dessert world built on improvisation. You bite again and taste thyme, lavender, something burnt but not unpleasant. The ash plays off the honey oddly well, like crunching sugar in a campfire breezeth. Next treat is wrapped in fig leaves and grilled until the cheese inside melts, slightly goat milk soft, with a bite of sharpness, drizzled in honey and sprinkled with poppy seeds. The leaf adds a bitterness that keeps it all from being too soft, too sweet, too mucknerby. A boy chews on a stick of candied quince rolled in ground nuts. It's chewy, fragrant, and gets stuck in his teeth. His mother watches him with a sigh while stirring a pot of grape must being reduced into syrup. It bubbles slowly, sending up the scent of distant raisins and summer dust, and man brags that his family makes the best sesame honey bars on the island. He brings out a flat slab, breaks off a piece, and hands it to you. It's hard, almost glassy, and shatters in your mouth, a sharp crunch followed by slow sweetness and the faint metallic edge of ancient bronze pans. In another home, you're served a cold dessert, wine mixed with grated cheese and pine syrup. It sounds like a dare, but it's actually delicious, soft, smooth, and vaguely herbal, like the drink version of falling asleep under a laurel tree. Someone offers dried figs stuffed with walnuts pressed together like little sandwiches. A simple snack maybe, but rich, sticky, and satisfying. The figs have been sun-dried on woven mats, their skins leathery and packed with concentrated flavor. You reach for a small dish of preserved fruit slices soaked in brine, then honey, then brine. Again, the process sounds like a mistake, but the result is addictively complex, sweet, sour, salty, and soft all at once, like a candy that's been passed through a philosophical debate. Before reaching your mouth, a woman laughs at your hesitation and offers her favorite, a round cheese ball rolled in crushed rose petals and aged in a clay jar. For 3 days the petals have faded to gray, but the flavor is sharp, floral, and unexpected. You nod as if this makes sense. You remember what the old woman said about ash. It adds bite. That idea is everywhere in these desserts. Nothing is easy, nothing just sweet. There's always tension. Vinegar with cheese, honey with herbs, salt with fruit. The Greeks didn't want a dessert to lull you, they wanted it to balance you. Even their festival sweets are complicated. One treat, called plakis, involves layering barley dough with goat cheese, honey, and crushed nuts, sometimes topped with burnt citrus peel. It's heavy, messy, and adored. You eat it with both hands and still lose half of it to your lap. And in the corner of the kitchen, there's always a jar of something pickled, even for dessert. Maybe it's sour cherries in vinegar, or preserved lemon rinds soaked in must. These aren't side dishes. They're served right after the meal to wake you up after all that honey and cheese. The sky outside is warming to gold. Bees hover near fig branches, and the smell of burnt crust still lingers in the air. The woman packs a small cake in a fig leaf and slips it into your hand. For later you sit under a tree and take another bite. Sweet, sour, smoky, soft. There are no clean flavors in ancient Greek desserts. No icing, no whipped cream, no chocolate, just layers of earthy ingredients shaped by sun and fire and imagination, and maybe that's enough. Smoke rises in lazy spirals above the temple courtyard. The scent is unmistakable. A mix of roasted meat, fresh herbs, and something oddly metallic. Maybe it's the brazier. Maybe it's divinity, or not here for lunch, at least not technically. You're here for a sacrifice, and like many ancient visitors you find yourself thinking less about the gods and more about what's being cooked. This is sacred food offered to the Olympians. But once the proper bits have been given up to the sky, what's left is for the people, and what's left smells amazing. You watch as priests carefully prepare the offering. They arrange the meat in sections, fat bones and flesh. The thigh bones wrapped in fat are tossed onto the flames where they crackle and spit. The smoke is for Zeus, of course, thick, rich, and full of meaning. But once the ritual parts are done, it's time to eat. You step back into the line with the others, waiting for the edible portion to be divided. It's goat today, or maybe sheep. It's then rubbed in oregano and a paste made of crushed olives and garlic. The outside is charred, the inside still pink. You chew slowly, wondering if the gods get jealous. Historians still argue whether average citizens really got to eat much at these sacred feasts. Some sources suggest only elites or temple staff received a share. Others describe whole villages gathering for these meals, bringing wine, barley, and loud conversation. Either way, if you're here, you're lucky. Next comes a cake made of barley and honey, shaped like a crescent moon and topped with sesame. It was offered earlier to Artemis, and now it's sliced and passed around. The outside is crisp, the inside dense and faintly sweet. Someone hands you a small skewer of grilled offal, lightly seasoned and still steaming. You don't ask what part of the animal it is. The priest nods in your direction, so you nod back respectfully, chewing liver, or possibly something less noble. Nearby, a child dips bread into a bowl of sacred wine and giggles when it turns her tongue purple. The bread is flecked with herbs and ash, a common theme these days, and the wine has been steeped with resin, pine bark, and maybe a hint of rosemary. It tastes like a forest in midsummer. Not far from the altar, a man is carefully tending to a small pot over a side fire. It contains a thick stew of lentils, goat fat, and wild onions. He stirs slowly, muttering to himself, before ladling a portion into a bowl and offering it to you. It's heavy, smoky, and oddly comforting, like stew made during a thunderstorm. You sit cross-legged beneath a fig tree, watching the smoke drift toward the sky. Somewhere a lyre plays softly. The sacrifice is complete, and the gods are hopefully satisfied. But what about the food offered only to gods? Food no mortal was ever meant to taste. There are stories of honey cakes, so pure they were buried with priests of Apollo, never touched by human lips. Cheeses, aged in sacred jars, then burned entirely in ritual. Fruit, harvested from trees grown in temple courtyards, never to be picked for meals. You remember hearing once that certain herbs were believed to belong only to Dionysus. Used in his rites, they were forbidden in kitchens, not for health reasons, but because flavoring your stew with the god's garnish was seen as stealing. And then there's ambrosia, that mythical food of the immortals. Some say it was real, some think it was just honey, others suggest a rare kind of fermented barley mixed with flowers. Whatever it was, humans were definitely not on the guest list. Still, some people tried. There are myths of mortals sneaking a bite from divine tables, tasting just once, before being struck blind or cursed with eternal hiccups, depending on the version. In a more grounded myth, a mortal woman is said to have baked bread for Hera, so perfect in its balance of sweetness and ash that the goddess wept and turned the baker into a constellation. The recipe was never written down tonight, though the food is for you too. After the fire dies down and the last hymn fades, the crowd drifts toward the tables. Platters of meat, bowls of olives, stacks of flatbread, and jugs of wine appear seemingly from nowhere. You eat slowly, savoring each bite, aware of the ritual woven through every flavor. The meat tastes richer, the bread denser, the wine sharper. Maybe it's the setting, or maybe it's the gods leaning in just a little. Simeon raises a cup. To Hestia, goddess of the hearth, you raise yours too, and sip deeply, and for just a moment everything tastes divine.
The night is thick now, and the fire crackles low. You're sitting with a few quiet souls under a canopy of stars, listening to someone tell the kind of story that makes you wish your stomach were emptier. Begins with a feast, not just any feast, but a mysterious one, a banquet, where every dish shimmered with honeyed glaze. Every cup overflowed with dark, sweet wine, and every guest left full and forever changed. Food, in the myths of Greece, was never just food. It could heal or harm, offer visions, or bring forgetting. A single bite could seal a fate. A single sip could blur the line between human and divine. Take the pomegranate, that jewel-toned fruit hiding its seeds behind tough skin. You hear again the story of Persephone, who tasted just a few in the underworld, and was bound to return each year. One moment of hunger, one sweet mistake, and a lifetime of seasonal return. You choose slowly on a dried fig, wondering how many seeds it has. You don't count. Then there's the story of King Tantalus, invited to dine with the gods only to take a gift meant to stay among them. For that he was left in a place where water stayed just out of reach, and ripe fruit hung always too high, always longing, never satisfied. Historians still debate whether these tales reflect real beliefs about sacred food, or are simply cautionary stories. Some say both, that people believed meals carried spiritual meaning, and one wrong bite could offend something greater. Someone passes you a little cup of wine and you sip it slowly. The myths have made you cautious. There's also the curious case of mushrooms. Some say the Greeks used them in feasts and festivals. Writings mention a dish with honey, cheese, and wild mushrooms. But then there's a tale of a priest who ate the wrong thing in a cave and lost his way for days. Some say it brought vision, others say confusion. You take another sip of wine and decide to stick with olives for now. A voice near the fire tells of a banquet hosted by a queen who served a meal that revealed more than it should. It's unsettling, and probably just a story, but someone across the fire quietly stops chewing. Then there are the subtle dangers: bitter almonds, leaves gone too long in storage, fish kept past their prime. Some believe ancient cooks perfected recipes that could influence rivals without anyone noticing. It wasn't always harmful though. Some feasts simply went strange. One old fragment of writing describes a dinner where the meat spoiled mid-meal and the guests thought it was a sign from Apollo. The host insisted it was just the sauce. You think back to earlier offerings, the sacred stews, the roasted dishes, the boiled delicacies. Everything now feels a little more mysterious, a little more uncertain. Someone breaks the tension with a joke about a man who ate so much honey, he slept for 3 days and missed his own wedding. You laugh, but only softly. The bees are still humming somewhere nearby. Woman shares a story of a temple where the priests once made a cake so dense it cracked the altar. No one remembers the exact recipe, but she claims it included rare minerals and marrow from goats. You wonder if she's exaggerating, but then again so is everyone else in the dark. The line between myth and memory fades. The meals of gods blend with the markets of mortals. One day you're chewing barley bread, the next you're tasting prophecy, and still you feel hungry. Someone passes roasted chestnuts, sweet and soft there. Warmth brings you back from the edge of story. You remember where you are under stars, in a land where food carries tales, and every tale ends with another bite. You stretch, lie back on a worn wool blanket, and close your eyes. The fire pops gently. The stories drift on, and somewhere out there a god is probably still chewing. You wake with a scratchy throat and a belly that still remembers the myths from last night. The fire is just a pile of ashes now, and the sky has shifted to a dull gray. The perfect time for breakfast soup, or, as the ancient Greeks might call it, medicine. You shuffle toward a home where someone's been boiling garlic for at least an hour. The air is thick with it, sharp enough to clean your sinuses from across the street. A woman with eyes like storm clouds hands you a steaming bowl of thin broth and motions for you to drink. You sip slowly. It burns slightly, in the best way. A mix of garlic vinegar, wild greens, and something bitter, probably wormwood. She nods approvingly. That'll fix you, she says, or break you. Either way it moves things. Along ancient Greek medicine was deeply tied to food, not because doctors were nutritionists, but because everything you ate was believed to shape your body, your thoughts, and even your mood. Garlic was one of the most important ingredients a cure for infection, parasites, and general weakness, and sometimes an unfortunate breath. Weapon historians still argue whether certain food cures were based on observation or pure theory. Hippocrates wrote entire treatises about lentils and leeks as healing agents, while other physicians swore by the power of boiled cabbage to cure heartbreak, nightmares, and foot pain. You sit on a flat stone and chew a chunk of barley bread dipped in honey mixed with pounded fennel. It's supposed to soothe the throat. The honey is thick and gritty, probably crystallized from age. But the sweetness cuts through the herbs nicely. A man nearby has a pot of something that smells like burnt onions and vinegar. He calls it a tonic and insists it prevents aging. You believe him right up until he starts coughing uncontrollably into his elbow. You remember hearing of a famous philosopher who refused wine for years and lived on a diet of boiled lentils and spring water. He eventually died of what sounded like severe boredom. There are the strange cures. One involves wrapping your legs in warm fig leaves to draw out bad humors. Another says that sleeping with a clove of garlic under your tongue will drive away evil dreams. You try not to imagine how your breath would smell in the morning. In another town, you once saw someone crush snails into a paste and rub it on a swollen ankle. The idea was that what moved slowly might slow the swelling. You're still not sure if that makes sense or just sounds poetic. Healer believes strongly in onions, raw, boiled, pickled. He doesn't care. He claims they clean the blood, sharpen the mind, and make the body light. You try a bite of one and feel your soul briefly attempt to escape through your ears. There's also the famous ancient Greek hangover remedy, a soup made from boiled cabbage and sheep's milk. It is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds, but after a long symposium night, it supposedly works. You chew a wilted cabbage leaf and feel your stomach grumble. In protest, some cures are sweet though. There's a fig and poppy seed mash, rolled into little balls and eaten before bed to help with sleep. A kind of ancient sedative wrapped in fig leaves and whispered over with short prayers one woman swears by. Her chestnut tonic, chestnuts roasted, ground into powder and mixed with wine and river water. She gives you a taste. It's strangely creamy with a bitter finish, but she says it fixed her husband's back, so you nod with respecting wealthier homes. They might use saffron, cloves, or even imported cinnamon in their remedies, not just for flavor, but for energy, clarity, and noble digestion. You don't entirely know what noble digestion means, but it sounds expensive. There's also the more philosophical approach. Some thinkers believe the best cure is moderation, never too much salt, never too much wine, always balance. You hear this advice a lot, usually from people with terrible skin and empty cups. Still, something in all of it makes sense. The way food is treated not just as fuel, but as a rhythm you eat, not just for hunger, but for healing, timing, and temperament. As you finish the last sip of your garlic broth, the woman nods at you again and drops a sprig of rosemary into the ashes of the fire. She says, it clears the air and helps with memory. You breathe in the scent and feel a little steadier. You walk slowly now, the sun warming the back of your neck. A soft breeze carries the smell of herbs and honey and something cooking further down the street. Maybe a new remedy, maybe just lunch. Either way, your body thanks you. The courtyard is already half full when you arrive. Voices echo off whitewashed walls, and sunlight spills across the floor in lazy stripes. Someone is laughing loudly, someone else is already chewing. You find a place near a fig tree and sit quietly, watching. You're here to eat, but more than that, you're here to observe, because in ancient Greece, how you ate said everything about who you were. You Reclining slightly, your legs tucked to one side, the way the wealthier folks prefer the food, will be brought to you, but there are rules about posture, eye contact, and which hand you use to tear the bread. A bowl of olives arrives there, wrinkled, dusted with something dry and herbal, and sitting in a shallow pool of oil you reach. In carefully avoiding the common mistake of grabbing more than one at a time, people notice ancient Greek dining had layers, especially in the symposium setting. There were hosts, guests, servants, entertainers, and occasionally philosophers who wouldn't stop talking long enough to eat much. Everyone had their role, and expectations ran high. Historians still argue whether utensils were ever used during meals, or if everything was eaten with fingers and a knife. You haven't seen a fork yet, and no one seems bothered you. Tear a chunk of bread and use it to scoop up a mound of mashed lentils sprinkled with crushed coriander. Cross the courtyard, someone burps loudly. No one flinches. That's part of the rhythm. Eating is loud, messy, sometimes even musical. You hear a lyre plucking softly under the conversation, a sleepy rhythm that barely holds your attention. The next course arrives, boiled vegetables arranged in a neat spiral around a dollop of goat cheese. You notice that no one eats the center of the dish first. That's seen as greedy. Always circle inward. Take your time. There are no individual plates here, just large communal platters. Everyone dips, tears, scoops, some spill, some laugh. One man sneezes directly into his elbow and swears it's a blessing from Dionysus. No one agrees. You remember what someone told you earlier about seating hierarchy. The closer you are to the host, the more favored you are. The farther back, the closer to the servants, the lower your status. You glance at your position under the fig tree and decide you're somewhere in the middle. Maybe a solid C+. Suddenly, they're shouting. A man argues over a missing cup. Someone else accuses him of spilling it, and a third person starts reciting a poem about how wine disappears like youth eventually. They all agree the cup was cursed and demand another round. The etiquette here is both strict and fluid. Rules exist, but so do exceptions. Loud guests are sometimes honored, silent ones are sometimes ignored. Throwing olive pits behind you is fine, as long as they don't hit anyone important. Guests are allowed to recline. Everyone else sits upright or leans against something solid. Someone across from you eats with one hand and fans themselves with the other. A bit dramatic, but no one stops the man. Then there's the drinking. There's always wine, but never straight, diluted with water mixed with herbs or resin or even pine sap. It arrives in a large bowl from which smaller cups are dipped and passed, handled carefully, always from the right. The toast is important. The host raises a cup, mumbles something about Apollo and goats, and then drinks. Everyone follows, some more enthusiastically than others. Servant trips on a loose tile and drops a platter of pickled onions. They scatter like marbles. Everyone freezes. The host waves it off casually, and the party resumes. But you can't help noticing the servant's face turn pale before he disappears back into the kitchen. Not everything is light. A philosopher nearby begins talking about moderation again. This is his third time you consider moderating your own urge to toss a fig at him. The next course is unexpected. A tray of stuffed grape leaves filled with pine nuts, garlic, and mashed barley. There, soft, warm, and slightly sour. You bite in and suddenly understand why someone once called them the food of poets. Rehanded a small wedge of cheese, hard, sharp, and wrapped in fig bark. You nibble slowly, trying not to chip a tooth. A woman beside you dips hers in honey and nods thoughtfully, as if solving a riddle. There's a rhythm now. Eat, sip, laugh, pause, repeat. Someone starts a song. Everyone joins badly and joyfully. Bread is passed, cups are refilled, stories grow taller, and fish becomes sea monster, becomes god. Dining here isn't just nourishment. It's theater, conversation, and quiet rivalry. You feel full and slightly dizzy from the wine, the sun, and the endless rules disguised as traditions. As the afternoon stretches on, someone dozes under a column. Another guest begins juggling olives to mild applause, and a dog sniffs the edge of the table before being gently shooed away with a sandaloo. Recline deeper, stretch your legs, and let your eyelids fall. Just for a moment, the hum of voices, the scent of oil and herbs, the faint twang of a lyre all swirled together in the warm, heavy air of eaten like a Greek hand. No one threw a fig at you.
You blink awake to the sound of shouting and the unmistakable thunk of someone dropping a discus. A man runs past carrying a basket of bread, another waves a spear for no clear reason. Welcome to the training grounds where food meets muscle and modesty goes missing. Scent in the air isn't perfume or incense, it's sweat, barley, and baked garlic with a strong breeze of ambition. You're here to eat like an athlete, or at least try to keep up. A young man offers you a strip of roasted pork wrapped in vine leaf. It's warm, salted, and tougher than expected. He tears his with his teeth and runs off toward the wrestling pit. You chew slower, watching him vanish in a cloud of dust. Athletes in ancient Greece didn't eat like gods, they ate like laborers, big portions heavy on grain, cheese, and sometimes a staggering amount of meat. The average Olympic hopeful might consume multiple loaves of barley bread, daily soaked in wine, water, and occasionally goat broth for flavor. Historians still argue whether meat was a regular part of athletic diets or just a prize after competition. Some evidence points to vegetarian routines focused on beans, onions, and dried fruit. Others claim champions like Milo of Croton ate whole animals in one sitting. The truth probably lands somewhere between heroic and deeply constipated. You move toward a long stone table where boys dip crusty bread into a dark barley soup. They call it maza, a dense mix of flour, olive oil, and herbs. It's simple, filling, and sticks to your ribs like friendly cement. You eat your portion and instantly feel heavier and slower. Next comes cheese, not the soft creamy kind, but a hard wheel of goat cheese, aged near a smoky fire and rubbed with salt and sage. It squeaks against your teeth, but sharpens your focus somehow. A coach nearby insists it builds stamina. You nod despite having no idea what that means. Another boy hands you a handful of figs, dried nearly to leather and stuffed with almonds. You chew, slowly feeling the sugar surge, a burst of energy followed by a faint longing for a nap. Simeon passes out a drink, a cloudy mix of water, wine, and grated carrot. He swears it keeps the joints soft. You try a sip and discover it mostly tastes like regret. Further down the field, a group of runners stretches while munching on boiled chickpeas and cold lentils. The food is basic but balanced enough to power sprints and avoid mid-race vomiting, not always successfully though. The man beside you mutters a story of a javelin thrower who lost his lunch mid-air. The javelin kept going. He did know Tony Boy is scooping a thick porridge into his mouth with alarming speed. It's a mix of millet, wild herbs, and mashed olives. His friend dunks a strip of salted fish into the same bowl, and they both laugh at your expression. Herbie. A group of men sits on low benches passing around a chunk of dried meat, possibly hair, possibly not. No one knows for sure, but the protein counts and taste is not the point. You spot a trainer slicing onions into bowls of wine stew. While giving stern lectures about discipline, he claims food reflects the soul. If your stew is thin, your spirit is weak. He adds more onions. A girl joins with a platter of dried apricots, dusted in coriander. They're tangy, chewy, and surprisingly energizing. Her role isn't as an athlete, but as singer set to perform during the closing games. She needs voice, not muscle, and claims these fruits make her sing like a mountain breeze. You eat one and feel vaguely tuneful. You hear about ancient training diets that banned bread entirely, relying only on fresh fruit and raw milk. Others avoided fish, believing it softened the limbs. Some believed olives slowed you down. Others swore by them for muscle tone. No one agrees, but everyone eats something. A young man wraps his hands in cloth, preparing for pancration, a brutal mix of boxing and wrestling. He grins as he snacks on barley cakes dipped in fish oil. You offer him a fig. He declines without breaking eye contact. Tone man describes his diet as holy, 6 eggs a day, and no laughter. His muscles look carved from marble, but his eyes are tired. You recline against a tree trunk, watching them train, run, lift, stretch, fall, rise again. The food keeps flowing. Bowls of beans, salted nuts, cured meats, flat cakes handed around with quiet murmurs of encouragement or teasing. This isn't feasting, this is fuel, and somehow It still manages to feel sacred. You take another bite of barley, bread soaked in wine, chewing slowly as the sun dips low over the field. A boy nearby breaks into a run, laughing, olive pits flying from his tunic. You laugh to finally full, but lighter than you expected. You may not win a race tonight, but you might just digest like a champion. The walls are high here and the gates are sealed. A silence hangs in the air, not peaceful, but tense, like the city itself is holding its breath. You are inside a besieged town. Food is running low and people have started eating differently. No more figs, no more honey cakes, no more asking what meat it is. You eat what appears. A woman hands you a bowl of thin stew. It smells like boiled bark and old onions. You sip and taste bitterness, dampness, something sour. She says it's acorn broth and tells you to be grateful when the usual stores run dry. Ancient Greeks got creative and sometimes desperate. They gathered roots, scraped moss, ground reeds into flour, and dried anything vaguely edible in the sun. Bark, leaves, even insects became food if hunger lasted long enough. Historians still argue whether siege foods were planned ahead or improvised in panic. Some say cities stockpiled flatbread and salted fish. Others describe entire cookbooks devoted to what you could stew when the pantry turned into a garden of weeds. You bite into a round lump handed to you by a boy with muddy feet. It's bread made with crushed grape seeds and something that tastes faintly like soil. It sticks to your teeth like regret but fills your stomach. On a nearby roof, someone is roasting what might be a rat. They've skewered it carefully, seasoned it with rosemary, and are pretending not to see the neighbors watching hungrily elsewhere. An old man breaks dried seaweed into flakes, adding it to a pot of barley husks and water. He claims it tastes like the sea. It doesn't, but you nod anyway. In the town square, the olive trees have already been stripped bare. Chickens are gone. Cats to pigeons are rare and valuable. The occasional beetle or snail is a small victor. You pass a woman chewing wild thistle, her lips slightly green. She swears it keeps the stomach calm. You believe her, if only because she looks calmer than everyone else. A family is gathered around a fire, roasting strips of old leather softened by boiling in vinegar. They chew slowly, methodically. The father tells stories to distract the children between bites. There's a rumor someone is trading spoiled wine mixed with resinous soup base. You try it, it's terrible. But warm on night, you're given a small pouch of roasted barley pebbles, heated and cracked over coals. They taste vaguely nutty, like someone's memory of a feast. It's not much, but it makes you smile. People start to share tips quietly between households, like which weeds to pick before dawn, how to stretch flour with crushed chickpeas, which stones make the best boiling weights for tiny clay pots. A child passes by gnawing a strip of dried turnip skin dipped in something sticky, probably grape must, but possibly sap. In a dark alley, you see a woman rubbing salt into fish bones, then grinding them into paste. She mixes it with oil and smears it on hard bread. It's salty, sharp, and oddly satisfying. You hear stories too, not just about food but what it means. A mother who fasts so her children can eat. An old soldier who gives up his barley cakes for the healer's dog, hoping it brings luck. A group that sings before meals to pretend it's still a festival. You chew another lump of roasted root smeared with crushed garlic and herbs. It's hot, it burns a little, but it keeps you warm. And in all of this, something strange happens. You stop craving honey. You stop dreaming about cheese. Instead, you focus on the next bowl, the next bite. The survival dishes become their own cuisine, rough, bitter, but real. Lonely afternoon, someone brings out a surprise. A single preserved olive passed hand to hand, each person taking just a sliver. The salt, the oil, the memory of better meals, wrapped in one briny moment. And then the gates open again. Siege ends. You step out into the sunlight, blinking and thin. The air smells like rosemary and fish and something baking in a distant oven. Your stomach growls, but gently, like it remembers how to be patient. You will eat differently now because hunger changes everything. The markets are loud again, voices rising like birds over stalls bursting with color. Olives shine in the sun, amphorae clink softly as they're shuffled into rows. You've seen this place before, but now it looks different, more luxurious, more crowded, more confusing. Beckus, this isn't just a local agora anymore. This is a port city, a crossroads, a banquet built on boats. You are in a place where ships dock daily, bringing tastes from far beyond the horizon. Babylonian beer bricks, Egyptian onions, spices from lands you've only heard about in quiet songs. You pass a merchant selling something pink and glistening, flamingo tongue, he says, sliced thin and salted like meat from the gods. You blink, nod, and move on. Ancient Greece was a patchwork of regions, each with its own tastes, but the ports united them with flavors from everywhere. And the wealthy wanted it all, anything rare, strange, expensive enough to make your neighbor jealous. Without a single word, historians still argue whether these exotic ingredients were common or reserved for feasts. Some records mention saffron being used in home kitchens, while others describe it being locked away like gold. Either way, it flavored a lot more than stew. Simeon hands you a skewer of meat glazed in tamarind paste, spicy, sweet, sour. The tamarind came from trade with the East, brought in wrapped in wax cloths, packed between jars of wine. You chew slowly, eyes watering. Slightliner B. A man opens a crate of dried figs from Carthage. Their skins are darker, their flesh sweeter. He slices one, presses it onto a piece of cheese, and hands it to you. The flavors burst open, sticky, sharp, creamy, rich in every way. At another stall, a woman offers a drink made from fermented pomegranate, mixed with crushed mint and something smoky. She claims it came from Phoenician sailors who drink it to calm the sea. You sip it and feel your eyebrows rise. You spot a row of amphorae labeled in careful script, spiced oil from Libya, date syrup from Arabia, cinnamon, honey possibly from somewhere even farther. The jars themselves are as ornate as the contents, painted with scenes of ships, gods, and dancing goats. Not all imports were glamorous, some were just weird. A tub of pickled fish eggs sits next to a bowl of fermented locust paste. The vendor insists it's good on bread. You believe him only halfway. Zamin offers you something called wheat bubble, a soft dough steamed over seawater and filled with boiled herbs. It tastes like fog and regret, but you nod appreciatively. A group gathers round a crate of Babylonian beer bricks, hard, dense bundles of dried grain and spice meant to be dissolved into water or wine. The taste is murky, sweet, sour. The texture is like drinking bread, but it fills you up and keeps you warm. You pass a shop selling salt-packed lemons used to brighten stews and pickled turnips. The merchant waves you inside and hands you a slice of dried citrus dipped in resin oil. It's bitter and tart like eating a thunderstorm. A trader from Egypt opens a tin of powdered lotus root, meant to be boiled with goat milk and honey as a sleeping tonic. She says it helps dreams stay soft and memories fade. You consider buying some just for the meat. One table, a cook mixes rice from a northern port with fish caught that morning, seasoning it with herbs not grown within 100 miles. She calls it harmony. You call it chewy, but strangely delightful. Lone man brags he once tasted peppercorns from India, ground so fine they vanished in the steam. He says they made his tongue sing. You raise your cup in honor and sip more of your pomegranate mint concoction, and just when you think you've seen it all, you spot a bundle of long, thin twigs tied with twine. Turns out they're dried seagrass used to wrap cheese or line clay ovens. The seller tells you they also help digestion, possibly cure hiccups, and definitely impress dinner guests. Now the sun is dropping low. Amphorae cast long shadows. Market dogs nap under carts. Half-eaten skewers litter the road. A boy chases a loose fig and disappears between tents. You sit on a low step, chewing dried apricot stuffed with cinnamon seeds and staring at the harbor. Ships creak gently in their moorings, ready to bring new flavors tomorrow. And you realize something imported doesn't always mean better, but it always means different. And in ancient Greece that was often enough. The breeze is gentle tonight, and the streets are quiet. A single oil lamp flickers outside a modest home. You follow the smell of something soft and sweet drifting from an open window. A final meal perhaps, or a final thought inside. A philosopher is finishing dinner. A small bowl of lentils sprinkled with herbs sits next to a slice of barley bread. He eats slowly, methodically, each bite as deliberate as a sentence. He'll sit nearby, not speaking, just listening. The food is simple but not dull. It has balance, substance, comfort, nothing that shouts. Everything that lingers. Pythagoras once banned beans. They cause turmoil, he said, not just in the stomach but in the soul. His followers took it seriously, refusing legumes in honor of spiritual clarity, a strange rule perhaps, but one he believed down to his sandals. Historians still argue whether this was a literal ban or symbolic. Some say the beans represented chaos. Others say he just didn't like the side effects. Across the room, someone chuckles while chewing a chickpea cake and says Plato would have eaten it anyway. That man knew moderation. Eat when hungry, drink when dry. Think before both philosophy and food were tangled together in Greece. Meals were moments to reflect. Meals were metaphors, and teacher claimed a soft cheese represented reason. It holds its shape, but yields when pressed, not too sharp, not too bland. If your meal was balanced, perhaps your thoughts would be to your handed a dish of barley stew. It's thick and earthy with a touch of honey and vinegar, the kind of meal a student eats while rereading the same scroll for the third time. You spoon it slowly and feel your thoughts soften. Simeon tells the story of a thinker who once ate nothing but apples for a week. Said it clarified the senses. No one remembers what he discovered, just that he got very tired of apples. The room grows quieter, more thoughtful. Cups are emptied, plates wiped clean. The host offers a final round of wine mixed with spring water and rosemary, a soft blend. Nothing bold, no surprises, just calm. In the corner, a sleepy student plays with a slice of cheese, carving shapes with his fingernail. He claims it helps him remember his lessons. Someone else jokes that if he carves a goat he'll pass his exam. Automatic life conversation turns to memory. What do we keep? What do we forget? Food and thought drift together like wine and water. Some meals stay with us, others fade into flavorless hazy. And guest tells of a man who ate so many honey cakes he floated into the sea and was never seen again. No one questions the story. It feels right. You remember a pie from days ago stuffed with figs and soft herbs, shared by strangers, passed between hands before anyone asked your name. The taste is gone, but the warmth remains. There's no feast tonight, just the quiet satisfaction of a meal eaten with care. You sit back watching shadows stretch across the floor. Someone hums a dog sighs nearby. Wind touches the corners of the room like a whisper. You eat the last bite of bread and feel it settle like a thought. Finally finish it, and then just before sleep you hear the soft voice of the host. May your stomach be full and your dreams be light. No, the fires are low and the bowls are empty. The stars outside blink slowly above the rooftops, and the air has cooled to a gentle hush. You lie back on a woven mat, the kind that smells faintly of olive leaves and old stone. Your hands rest on your chest, warm and still. Your thoughts drift like smoke, curling upward without hurry, without edge. Around you the night carries traces of every flavor you've known: fig and cheese, barley and vinegar, honey and ash. The quiet comfort of lentils, the mischief of fermented fish, the unexpected softness of a snail stew shared in laughter. You remember the way bread crumbled in your fingers, how wine shimmered in shallow bowls, how a single olive could be both ordinary and sacred, depending on the hour. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of forgotten footsteps on stone pots, the gentle weight of clay in your hand, the rise and fall of market voices now long fetid. You are far from the agora now, far from the symposium, far from the snails and goat cheese and black broth, far even from the hunger. What lingers is softness of fullness that asks nothing, a story told through taste, a history made from bits. And now it's time to rest, so let your thoughts dim, let the last ember glow and the air grow still. Let the ancient world settle gently around you like the corners of a wool blanket. You're full, you're safe, you're home. Good night.